this energy crisis and this climate crisis, healthcare crisis. Even before this crisis hit, the worst financial crisis, full-blown crisis, the financial crisis to a historic economic crisis, period of crisis. Worst financial crises face a crisis like this again.
Financial crisis, healthcare crisis, global warming crisis. The president keeps using that word to sell big government solutions to these crises. But someone here says there's only one crisis in America he should be focusing on, and that is big government spending. Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Elizabeth McDonald, and Jack Gage, along with Quentin Hardy, Evelyn Roosley, and Mike Maiello. Steve, only one real crisis?
Well, it certainly feeds the big crisis of the weak dollar. People fear the Federal Reserve will print the money, which it's already started to do by buying long-term Treasury securities. That leads to inflation, which leads to a weak economy. And the spending binge, and it is a spending binge, who would imagine George Bush looking like Scrooge? This is before the tsunami of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security hit. So we're headed for a cliff.
So, Mike Maiello, really only one crisis, and that's spending too much government money.
There's one crisis. It's not a spending crisis. It's a priority crisis. I can tell you one thing we need to spend more on just right away. You have people falling off the unemployment rolls now because unemployment benefits aren't available long enough for people to find jobs because we're not creating jobs. Right now, they should expand unemployment benefits. There's some spending we need. We need a priority to prioritize the needs of real people.
All right. Well, Jack, we were talking about cutting spending. He's talking about even more spending.
Right. It sounds like another box we should add to the intro. Now we have a welfare crisis, too. Mike, I have to disagree. I think spending's the big problem here. You don't have just huge budget deficits at the moment, as well as public debt of U.S. debt outstanding. You also have estimates growing every 3 months, trillions of dollars being added to what the estimates are 10 years out, upwards of $17.5 trillion for our public debt, 75% of GDP. So these are problems that hit consumers, taxpayers, and savers where it hurts the most. And it has to be brought back under control. Programs like overhauling Medicare right now or looking at global warming and solving that's just not something that we can do right now.
All right. And Quentin, as big time a spender as Bush was, this spending is making Bush look like a piker.
Oh, no, that's not correct, David. What we need to spend here is a moment thinking about how we got such a big deficit. And only 7 to 10% of it is Obama. The rest is Bush's crazy war in Iraq, misguided financial system, saving all that, and things like the Medicare drug spending bill. Obama inherited this crisis. He's doing his best. If you like the review of how to do this, though, on Friday, Barney Frank said he'll back Ron Paul's investigation of the Federal Reserve and how they spend their money. We got to get our arms around the spending, but it's not what Obama's doing.
All right.
It's
well,
what happened
EMAC,
beforehand.
I'm thinking of the $1 trillion programs.
Yeah.
The stimulus spending was close to $1 trillion. The medical thing will be close to $1 trillion. Global warming close to $1 trillion. I mean, this is on a scale that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it does surpass Bush's spending. And Bush, unfortunately did spend a lot of money. And I like what Steve has always said. The government has been spending like drunken sailors. And that's, what have you said? That's sort of an insult. But the issue is,
sailors spend their own money.
Yeah, that's you just stole my punchline, Steve. That was my punchline. But, we're right. That's all right. We've fallen through the looking glass here. We really have. And what I like is how the president is saying he's spending to create or save 3.5 million jobs. I think we hired 25,000 government workers recently. That's the job growth we're seeing, just to track, that fake statistic. So, the debt to GDP is around 360% when you factor in Social Security and Medicare unfunded liabilities. We're in a serious danger zone right now.
Evelyn, let's be specific. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
In the Bush era, it went up. Domestic spending went up about 40%. Right now, we have about doubled that just in the past 6 months.
Look, I don't really think that's quite true. When you say a scale we've never seen before, when we look at World War II, we were spending a lot more than we are today in terms of
we were in a world war.
But at the same time, the growing deficit is a major problem, but it shouldn't be the number one priority today. I think we should be looking at how fragile the economy is still is today. And I don't think that the inflation issues and the growing deficit should be the number one focus, because if you look at the solutions to that, the possible solutions to that, it's, tax increases or clawing back stimulus spending or stopping up all the liquidity on the credit markets, which we don't want to do.
All spending does, David, is take a pail of water from one end of the pool to the other end of the pool and lose some on the way, thanks to government inefficiency. It does not stimulate the economy. Didn't do it in the 30s, 70s, not doing it now. So if you want to have incentives like Reagan and Kennedy did, fine. A little bit of government restraint, fine, but the spending doesn't work.
You know, Steve is absolutely right, and in fact, the interest costs alone, we've said it time and again, equates to the budgets of about a dozen federal agencies. And when you look at the the White House's projection of the deficit spending, right, they're using very optimistic assumptions that Treasury yields will stay low at 3%, ignoring other governments issuing their own treasuries. You have a bond glut, yields go up. So that means interest costs will go up too. Some estimates $2 trillion. That's more than the size of the GDP, I think, of Australia and, Brazil and India.
Quentin, go ahead.
Steve, I do think there is a place for government spending, and you do too. You like a strong defense. That's government spending. The biggest recipients of government spending are defense contractors in this country. Now, there is no doubt the deficit, 90% of it, is due to the financial crisis. The financial system is still barely breathing. And the only way business can get any action at all now is government spending. They're not getting bank loans. We could wait for those guys to recover, but it could be years.
Jack?
Oh, look, let's establish something right away. There are good deficits and there are bad deficits. There isn't a universal rule. Look at what Reagan did, where he came in, he ran a deficit, he won the Cold War, he cut spending by 5%, reduced taxes by 10%, and it led to a 25-year bull market run. So that's a way where a deficit serves the purpose of stimulating growth in the economy, creating jobs, creating prosperity.
Mike, go ahead.
I agree with Jack here, actually, that there are good and bad deficits. A good deficit is when you borrow money that's going to pay dividends later on. Now, ever since I was cognizant of the news, we've had healthcare problems that have been unsolved. We've had pollution and environmental problems that have been unsolved. Now people want to tell me, oh, we can't address those now. We don't have the money. That's what they always say. That's why these problems persist. If we don't get up and do something, let's spend a little money.
All the deficit numbers we're talking about doesn't take into account the cost of the bailout programs, which is $11.3 trillion alone. Federal Reserve says a lot of that may be backed by collateral. That's probably junky assets. You saw a Goldman Sachs executive out with a new book called It Takes a Pillage to Fix the System. So would any president have been elected, Republican or Democrat, if they played it straight with the American people that they were going to spend $3.6 trillion on a budget? We don't know if it will be effective. $787 billion on stimulus.
Well, hold on. Let me ask Steve. Will any president from either party have the guts, the backbone to stop this kind of spending, Steve?
The public would support them, and you need positive systemic reforms for things like health care and Social Security. You don't have to throw grandma in the snow to do it.
Yeah, I think what Mike Miles said is interesting, too, because if you look at the priorities of this president, he said as recently as last week at the UN that we have to prioritize, as tempting as it is, to put the economic recovery first, that global warming is the recovery, and that has to take precedence. That's the kind of misprioritization that's getting us into trouble.
That's the last word. And still ahead, Sarah Palin's advice to President Obama on getting Americans working again. We've got it right here coming up. But first, the Democrats under fire for a plan cutting $100 billion from Medicare. But some here say we need to cut even more. The flip side on the other side of a short break.